You're listening to Spurscast, episode 660. My name is Paul Garcia, and I am your host here on the Spurscast. Today I'll be joined by Project Spurs writer Collin Reid. In this episode, Collin and I will preview the San Antonio Spurs entering free agency on Thursday. Let's jump right into this episode with Collin. Collin, how you doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a wild week. A lot of Twitter scrolling, a lot more than I'm used to. So excited to get through Thursday and see what comes of everything.
Yeah, I know it's been. I'm ready for this. And I do want to note because, like you said, it's just been a wild week. Rumors are coming in almost every hour at this point. So I will note that Collin and I are recording this on Tuesday evening, June 28th. So again, if something breaks, somebody gets traded, there's reports that the Spurs want to sign somebody. You all know why we didn't cover it in this episode. So let's jump right into this episode, the final one before free agency begins on Thursday, June 30th. All right, so. Collin, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about what is the state of the Spurs' roster before going into free agency. So after the NBA draft, they did use all three picks. They drafted Jeremy Sohan at number 9. They drafted Malachi Branham at 20, and then Blake Wesley at 25. So they ended up not making trades like we thought they would do. Instead, they actually drafted all three players, and it does look like they're going to keep all three of those players on the roster. I was at the AT&T Center on Saturday with the players, and the Spurs did a big old presentation for their families and stuff. So it looks like, yes, the Spurs do intend on keeping these three players, these rookies. So with the three players, the Spurs have 12 players on guaranteed contracts, and that is because Zach Collins' deal over the weekend guaranteed last Friday at $7.35 million. So now his deal for next season is also guaranteed. So that's 12 players on guaranteed deals. And when you consider that they still have Tre Jones, Keita Bates-Diop, and Jock Landale on the roster, they're all three of those players are on non-guaranteed deals. That's 15 players. So right now, if it was October and the season was about to start, the Spurs would have no open roster spots. So they can carry up to 20 players into the offseason. And again, they can still make decisions on Jones, Bates-Diop, and Jock Landale to waive them before the regular season starts. Now, they do have 5 players entering free agency. They have Lonnie Walker IV. They have Joe Wieskamp, Devontae Cacok, Robert Woodard II, and DJ Stewart. We know that Wieskamp, Woodard II, and Stewart will all be on the Spurs' training summer league roster, should I say? So they're all going to play at summer league in Vegas. There's been no word yet on if the Spurs are going to tender Lonnie a qualifying offer for any of these players. They can all become restricted free agents if the Spurs extend them a qualifying offer, and they have until Wednesday, June 29th. I don't know if the date's 4 p.m. I know that the option date is 4 p.m., but I don't know if that's actually for qualifying offers as well. So, when the Spurs drafted 2 guards at 20 and 25, I started to basically my cap sheet changed completely where I was like, no, I don't know. I don't think they're going to give Lonnie that $6.5 million qualifying offer to make him a restricted free agent. I really feel like they're going to go. I sent you a picture of this on Twitter earlier today. I just said, my assumption is they're just going to go into free agency with that open cap space and not having Lonnie on the books, letting him be a unrestricted free agent. What are your thoughts with how they're going to approach Lonnie Walker's free agency?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I was listening to a lot of listening lately with all of the people. One of the cool things about today's era is, you have Mark Stein on Spotify Live, and you have Jake Fisher doing his thing on Collin, and Woj is all over ESPN and The Athletic. You have so there's so many sources to get these news now. It's not just in this tweet form. And I was listening to Mark Stein, and he was talking about how the Spurs have been very player friendly recently, especially when a player no longer fits with their construction or no longer wants to be there. And the Spurs are usually very amicable in letting the player choose his own future from there. So he was expecting, maybe the Spurs won't even tender him a qualifying offer so that he can kind of be the forger of his own destiny here. And I wouldn't be surprised. It really does seem like, the only way I could have even seen him back on the Spurs is if they did tender him a qualifying offer. He didn't like the market and he just wanted to go back out next off season as an unrestricted free agent. But it seems like they're not even going to walk into that situation, especially after they drafted 2 6'5" guards. So I would be surprised if they tender that for him. And I think that he's going to be able to walk wherever he wants to go in free agency.
I agree with you there. And again, I wrote this Spurscast listeners, if you want to listen to, read it on projectspurs.com. I wrote the offseason primer going into free agency. And, I looked at all the teams and there's first of all, there's not a lot of cap space teams out there. And so for Lonnie to get an offer more than the mid-level exception of 10.3 million, I just don't see that. I don't know which team that is. And again, there's gonna be other free agents out there too. So as far as like, I don't think the Spurs would be competing with anyone if they made him restricted free agent to try to sign him. But again, a team's not going to offer more than the 10.3 million restricted. I mean, with the mid-level exception. So I agree with you there. I think that they're definitely going to probably just let him go into unrestricted free agency, not renounce his cap hold initially, because that way they can work with the sign and trade if he finds a team that he wants to go to and they want to get some sort of assets back for him. Since they're losing him. So I think that's the approach. Again, we'll find out if Lonnie or any of these other 4 free agents become restricted free agents. The Spurs do have until Wednesday to make that decision. And again, 12 players on guaranteed deals right now. So there's 3 open roster spots if they were to waive Jones, Bates-Diop, and Jock Landale. So that is the shape of the roster where they're at going into free agency on Thursday. Now let's talk about the 3 approaches the Spurs can do with all this cap space. Again, they can open up to 34.4 million in cap space. Again, if they renounced all their free agents and they waived all their players on non-guaranteed deals, the most cap space they can open is 34.4 million now that Zach Collins' deal guaranteed. 34.4 million is probably only enough to pitch to a free agent a max offer sheet, someone like DeAndre Ayton, who has 0 to 6 years of experience, so a player who hasn't been in the league that long. Now, the Spurs can do 3 things with their cap space, and that's what we're going to talk about. Option 1 is to try to go sign a free agent. They can do that with that 34 million. Option 2 is to try to trade for a player. So we've seen some discussions around players like John Collins, who they can bring in a player's contract. Who they still want on their team. Or option 3 is they can just be a team that's going to get some picks for bad contracts to, the players that teams are trying to load. So that's what we're going to go through in detail here, each of these 3 options for the Spurs. So first, let's talk about option 1, which is, the more exciting thing, which would be to go sign free agents to get involved, seeing, the Spurs might try to sign this player. All right. So here are the free agents that the Spurs have been had interest in reportedly this past offseason so far. There's DeAndre Ayton. We do know that the Spurs and Pistons right now financially the only 2 teams that can offer him a max offer sheet of 30.5 million. Nobody else can. So that's the 2 teams. Now, because the Pistons got Jalen Duren via trade on draft night. There's multiple reports have shown that they may not pursue Ayton after all. It's not concrete, but again, if they may not pursue him. The Spurs, they could try to pursue him again. They can offer max offer sheet, or they can try to work with Phoenix on the sign and trade. Probably Jakob Poeltl will be involved, but there's no indication quite yet if that's going to be what they do. The other player who the Spurs reportedly had interest in is Colin Sexton. Now, the interest in him was before the draft. I'm not sure that they have interest anymore because they just drafted 2 more guards recently in the draft. Sexton is also looking at over north of 20 million a year, and I just saw some recent reporting by The Athletic that the Cavs don't really want to give him more than 20. So again, there's going to be some negotiations going on there. They've also, been reported to have interest in Zach LaVine, although all signs right now point to LaVine just immediately re-signing with Chicago. So at the time, things have changed now. It looks like LaVine's staying in Chicago, and also the Spurs, if they did want to, offer LaVine a max contract, they couldn't do that right now. They would have to make some trades because they don't have more enough for his max. And then the last player they've been linked to is this guy Vasily Misic. He's 28 years old. He's a 6'5" point guard out of Anadolu Efes, the Turkish club. And the Spurs couldn't just sign this guy. They would actually have to make a trade with OKC to get his draft rights. And so that was just a report that they might have interest in him. If they end up moving somebody like DeJounte Murray, it makes no sense to bring in a 28-year-old player. But if they're trying to compete and maybe, stay in the playoff race or try to be a playing team, then yeah, maybe they could look at signing him. So let's begin with Ayton first. Colin, what are your thoughts on the Spurs? I guess this is the 2 ways, right? Let me just ask you this question. If they trade DeJounte to Atlanta or another team, then it looks like that's a signal that they're rebuilding most likely. Yeah. But if they don't trade DeJounte and they keep him, what do you think the chances increase that they might, pursue Ayton in free agency?
So the interesting thing about Ayton, and I've been having trouble with it myself, just trying to sit down and look really purely from a team building perspective. Okay, let's say the Spurs build around Murray. What do they need? What do they need going forward? And what's really interesting is now that we have this kind of proposed swap for DeJounte that might potentially involve John Collins, it's very weird because in my head, if you're building around DeJounte, a player like John Collins actually fits so much better. Mm-hmm. To me, I'm not quite sure. So I think that DeAndre Ayton is better on offense than Jakob Poeltl. Yes. I don't know if he's so much better that it's worth paying him 3 times as much. And I don't know if how he's better on offense makes the Spurs that much closer to being a great playoff team. it'll give the Spurs some vertical spacing. It'll give them a lob threat. But I don't think that this roster is one lob threat away from being a home court team in the playoffs. I think a big four, someone who can kind of stretch the floor, but also provide some other things like a John Collins might be. I think if you put that next to Pirtle, that's an even better fit. It looks like it's kind of one way or the other right now. But, the market is drying up for Ayton potentially. So the Spurs might be like the last ones who can even do anything with this. It's just, to me, it doesn't seem like a great value proposition in that you're not gaining a whole lot on your current team, but the salary is increased by like triple. So that to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of just a purely, is this team getting better standpoint. But I mean, they have to be considered at least pretty good in the mix just because they're one of the only teams left that can even do anything about it.
Yeah, I again, them and the Pistons are the only two that can offer. Right now I feel like Phoenix has a lot of leverage because they know if the Spurs and Detroit don't get involved here, well then they're either just going to have a staring contest with Aiden about are you going to take that your qualifying offer and then try to become an unrestricted free agent next year, or do you want to settle try to negotiate with us and try to figure out a deal? So again, I agree with you there. When I was writing up some scouting reports on different free agents recently, and when I wrote about Ayton, I noticed that what you said, the fact that yes, he's going to make a little bit substantial difference on offense, but not too much. And the thing is, they're going to lose a lot on defense. His numbers are just not even close to Jakob's numbers defensively. That's something to consider as well. And the fact, like you said, you're paying him 3 times more than what you're paying Jakob. I know that I had a Suns fan, respond to me in that article that, they think that Ayton can do more on offense if he gets a bigger role and he gets, more opportunity that he's just never been able to have with Chris Paul there, with Devin Booker there. So that's something to consider maybe. But again, I think that they only pursue Ayton if DeJounte's still on the team. If they move DeJounte Murray via trade, then I don't think it makes any sense to go after DeAndre and try to stay competitive. I'm of the opinion that I don't think they're going to pursue Colin Sexton or Zach LaVine. Do you agree there now?
Yeah, I think, looking at all three of the free agents, I mean, it feels like this is every single year, which, I mean, every free agent that is most valuable to the Spurs is the one who's going to be probably most valuable to all of the teams.
Mm-hmm.
But, of all of, talking about that team building and looking at okay, which team takes the Spurs from where they are now to 1 or 2 tiers up in terms of competitiveness. Zach LaVine is the only free agent who I look at and I'm like, yeah, he would add a lot to the Spurs in terms of their team building, but he's also the least likely to move teams. And if he were to move teams, the Spurs, I'm not quite sure why the Spurs would be at the top of his list. So yeah, I think if they get any of them, Ayton is really the only one where it kind of you can kind of see how that would come together. I think from a philosophy standpoint, I kind of like the signing of LaVine more, but I mean, that's like a 99% chance that he stays with the Bulls. And if he went anywhere else, I really don't see why it would be with the Spurs.
Yeah, so again, that's where that's at. Again, Misic, it's only, again, the Spurs would have to make a trade with OKC just to even get his draft rights. Again, that was just one report from Jake Fisher that they have some interest, but multiple NBA teams have interest in Misic, and he just had a good season overseas. So, look, this sounds kind of mean, but man, I just could not, last year I was actually able to find some free agents that might fit with the Spurs. I remember Doug McDermott was one of those players who I thought, hey, he'd be a good fit for San Antonio. Looking at their team and their needs, and then looking at, the fact that they are in a rebuilding mode right now, it's hard to find a, how do I say this? You can go out and get a veteran player who's out there, in the free agent group this year, but it's do you want to take minutes from some of your young guys or some of the players that you're trying to see what they can become? So, as I looked at the Spurs' depth chart again, based on Murray being there next year, it's hard for me to say, go get a wing. And then do you want that, whoever that wing is, if it's not like Zach LaVine, like you're saying, do you want that player playing over Devin Vassell? Do you want that player playing over Keldon Johnson, taking minutes from those players? Do you want that player taking minutes from, as far as a big, I still want to see what Zach Collins can do a little bit better, getting even just more, healthier and getting his legs under him even more, and then he also somebody like Doug McDermott might come off the bench. Maybe they could try to move him, but do you want players getting in front of Jeremy Sohan if he's able to get some minutes there at the 4, see what he can do as a young guy? And that's where, I just couldn't find a name on that free agent group right now currently that I would say, I want this player playing over this player or that player on the current Spurs roster. Did you find any notable free agents that you think are interesting for San Antonio?
So, my need for the Spurs was a 3 or a 4, and looking at the 3 or a 4 list for this offseason, it's kind of grim. And this isn't even using your test, which I think a lot of these players would fail. But you have the Martin twins who are restricted free agents.
Yeah.
TJ Warren, Nick Batum, Kyle Anderson, Derek Jones Jr., and Torian Prince. Those were like the best names I could find. So obviously you're not doing a lot.
Exactly.
Now there was one player who I actually thought could fit the Spurs, especially so if I think it could work whether or not the DeJounte trade happens, but especially if the DeJounte trade happens and they move on from Pirtle in that case, I think Isaiah Hardenstein could be a wonderful pickup for the Spurs. He's like an elite rim protector. So you still have the big who's flexible on defense and Sohan, but now you still have the elite rim protector. And I think that's the cornerstone of a defense. Like Isaiah Hartenstein is like the one guy who I look at this and I'm like, I would be excited if the Spurs sign that player. The others are like, I guess they kind of fit a need, but I don't know if, like you said, they even supplant any of the players they have now.
Yeah, so I think that's the big question. Again, if you're not getting somebody like a Zach LaVine, or one of those, those top players out there, it's just like, do you want to take minutes from the young guy? That's always going to my question. Hardenstein might be available because I heard, with the Clippers getting, making some moves here, getting John Wall most likely, and then also they just extended Zubac. They may not be able to get to be able to, they may be priced out of being able to get to re-sign Hardenstein. So maybe he is a player that they can look at. But like I said, yes, there's free agents out there, but I just don't know who would be that fit because of the way the Spurs are going. It's just like it's hard to get a grasp on what is their direction right now. There's all these reports that they might trade Murray, which would probably lead to rebuild. But then there's also reports. I mean, then if they do want to stay competitive, because like my other issue is like Pop's back. Most likely, Pop is is probably back. He talked to the rookies on draft night. He called them all. Basically, it looks like he's back. So are you really going to go full tank with Pop as your head coach? I just feel like they still want to compete, even if it's for another play-in spot. So that's why it's just kind of hard to read this team, and that's why I couldn't really get a good handle on who's the best free agent out there for them. And now let's take a quick break, Colin, and then let's listen to a word from our sponsors. The action never ends at DraftKings Sportsbook, especially this summer. With tons of ways to bet on all your favorite sports, you can fuel your fandom and feel the heat of the season like never before. Plus, right now, DraftKings Sportsbook is giving new customers a risk-free bet up to $1,000. That's right, make your first bet up to $1,000, and if it doesn't win, you'll get another shot to cash in. You can throw down on all the major action of baseball, golf, MMA, and more. Plus, with same-game parlays, spreads, money lines, over-unders, and props, your betting options feel endless. Best of all, DraftKings is safe, secure, and reliable. You can deposit and withdraw your cash whenever you want. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code TBPN. Make your first deposit and get a risk-free bet up to $1,000. That's promo code TBPN. Only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details. All right, so now that we talked about just the free agents that they could pursue, let's go to our next topic, which is how else could they use their cap space? They could use it to take back a player who might be disgruntled, or maybe just his situation's not working, but that player might still have some upside, and that player may have multiple years on his deal. And so for this situation, this is the kind of environment where you're using your cap space to trade for a player, and the Spurs can do this pretty easily because they're able, with all that cap space at $34 million, they can absorb a player into their deal. So the player who I'm thinking about right now, who we've already discussed, is John Collins, just because of the fact that, he's got 4 years left on his deal. He would be a player who you can, maybe give a bigger role to, see what he can do. And like you said, if they keep DeJounte Murray on the team with it, I think he would be a great pairing with the Spurs group that they have right now. And then also, Sohan could back him up off the bench. They could start him with a bunch of their wings and shooters. And so, the only issue here is that the latest reporting is that, Murray would be basically traded for Collins and, maybe, picks and stuff like that. And so that doesn't make sense to me. If you're moving DeJounte Murray, why are you bringing back John Collins? I could see maybe giving him a few months on the team, letting him see what he can do with an expanded role, and then maybe try to flip him in February if it's not working out. But let's just get into the trade discussions at this point. This is where we're at in this conversation. So, prior to the draft, the Spurs reportedly were talking to Atlanta. This is mostly via Jake Fisher of Bleacher Report, who is very plugged into situations. He's a reputable reporter who's breaking news right now. They basically wanted a Drew Holiday-like offer for Murray at this time, and that would basically be what the Bucks, what the Pelicans got for Holiday was 3 future first-round picks and 2 pick swaps. Then a few days later, after the draft, there was Fisher, and then also a local TV reporter in Atlanta. I think his name was Zach Klein. They reported both that Collins was no longer expected to be in the deal, and now it was looking like Danilo Gallinari would be in the deal, along with multiple first-round picks for Murray. And that the Spurs were looking for the future, like trying to aim for the 2023 draft. And so that was the most recent reporting. I mean, that was the latest reporting. And if they were to do this deal and they took Gallo in the deal, it would probably have to happen after July 6th, because they would have to Gallo's full $21 million deal does guarantee on Wednesday. They could extend that guarantee date, and just give Gallo, push his salary, his guaranteed amount from $5 million up northward to a different amount. However, Collin, right before we started recording, you were listening to Jake Fisher, who has been breaking a lot of this news. You were listening to him on the Dunked On podcast, and you had some latest updates saying that John Collins will now be most likely involved in the deal if it happens. What is the latest from Fisher that you heard?
Yeah, and so it was I wouldn't say it was super committal one way or the other. It was just mostly like, oh, I just got a text message right before I jumped on the show, and it sounds like John Collins might be back in the deal, kind of thing. So it sounds like he's in the discussions again, which, for all the reasons you were saying, is really interesting to me. I don't know why John Collins makes sense in San Antonio if they're trading out DeJounte Murray. The other thing he mentioned was Nate asked him, like, hey, do you have any guesses on what the Spurs are doing here? And he said, my educated guess is that if they do make the Murray trade, that teams around the league are expecting them to pivot into rebuilding, which I know, huge surprise, but it's just one of those, like, the Spurs are so averse to that, it seems like, that it's been so like, I'll believe it when I see it, but that is the expectation, is that they might be kind of, it is hard with the Pop situation, right? Because it does seem like he is coaching at least another year, maybe more, but like, it does seem like after last trade deadline where they moved on from Derek White, and now it looks like they're at least open to trading DeJounte Murray. It seems like they're at least coming to the truth that they might need to rebuild if they want to get back into championship contention. So not too many updates in terms of quantity, but he definitely said that he had heard that John Collins was back in the deal, which is interesting and a little odd to me. But I guess if that's what they need to get the deal done.
Yeah. So let's talk about Spurscast listeners maybe asking why is Murray being included in these trade discussions? Why do the Spurs want to move him? So according to Fisher's reporting initially before the draft, it's because the fact that DeJounte will be a free agent in 2 years, and he is going to be in if he stays at that all-star level, like we expect him to continue to get better, he's going to be commanding $40 million, because he'll be in that free agency range of like 7 to 9 years of experience. He'll be in his 8th year, I believe. And if, as long as the cap continues to go up like it is, he'll be getting $40 million. And so that's when the Spurs are going to ask, if this is not a team that's quite ready to start getting back into the top 6 of the playoffs again, start competing for those kind of playoff spots, and they're heading more so still in that rebuild direction, because a lot of their players are still very young on this roster, especially drafting 3 rookies last week. They may not be ready to have DeJounte be their main player that they want down the road, especially at that salary. And then just if they're not a team that's ready to like compete, like you said, to go deep into the playoffs. So again, if they're still in that rebuild mode, they're kind of on 2 different timelines here, and so that's why we're seeing Murray's name feature now, because the Spurs can offer him extensions each offseason, but it's never going to be close to what his max will be in 2 years from now. And he's definitely going to know what his max will be. I mean, yeah. So I think that's where they're having some struggles, is that it's almost like he kind of like, I guess I don't want to say peaked too early, but like he just became an all-star, and I don't know if they expected that, so quickly in this first current season without any kind of like veteran players around him. Did you have anything to add about Murray and his name being in there?
Yeah. So just because it's been, there's a lot to unpack with the Murray situation. I think one of it is like, well, why isn't a more reputable person talking about it? And I think one of the things that's interesting is to remember that DeJounte is represented by Clutch, and Shams has connections to Clutch. And I know that Woj can be very team friendly when he's making reports. We saw this with the Brooklyn Nets stuff. So I could see a world where these talks are absolutely happening. They're absolutely progressing, and it looks like they're on the right track. But both of those reporters, who are probably the most trusted, have a lot of incentive not to say anything until it's basically a done deal, because they kind of have skin in the game to some extent. It sounds like it's coming a lot out of Atlanta, which makes sense why, Shams, who has connections to the agency that represents DeJounte, and Woj, who I think has some connections in San Antonio, or maybe being a little bit more mum about it. And so that's that there. I know, you and I had even talked about, Zach Lowe was a little bit kind of like non-committal on how much he had heard, but I do think it's worth saying that, he had a segment on his show where he was talking about fake trades or whatever, where he's talking about the price of DeJounte Murray. So I think he's not talking about it unless there's some validity to it. Now, I still expect DeJounte, like if I had to put a prediction on it, I think it's more likely that DeJounte stays, but I think the trade talks are real. And I think there is a very sound reasoning behind moving him right now with 2 years left under team control, like you were saying. So I think it's become such a big firestorm for a lot of Spurs fans of like, how can we even trust this Jake Fisher guy? What's going on? And I think there's too much happening for it not to be at least a little bit real. And I think it might be a little bit more real than the skeptics are thinking it is. But I also think it's probably further away than like that tweet from the local Atlanta guy who said it's on the verge of happening, and then someone kind of pushed him and he said, I didn't say a deal was done. That to me sounds like maybe on the verge wasn't the right phrasing, and more like, hey, they're continuing talks. It sounds like it might not be super close, but it's still something they've been discussing over the past couple of days.
Exactly. No, you summed that up perfectly. Again, that's kind of been my issue with it too, is that I definitely trust Jake Fisher's reporting. He's a very reputable reporter. He does a lot of really good work. It's just that, I like to always see multiple, NBA media that we trust with their sources getting involved here. So like the fact that Woj hasn't said anything, Shams hasn't said anything. Zach Lowe basically said he tried to verify this, but he hasn't really heard that specific reporting. And then like even someone like Mark Stein's, basically taking what Fisher said. So again, I think that we're hearing more so from the Atlanta side, the fact that one of their local TV reporters was able to get a scoop. Is that that's where a lot of this is coming from. Again, we don't know how urgent it is, but like you said, it's definitely happening because, the fact that like you said, Zach Lowe discussed different DeJounte trades to different teams. I think that there's definitely, his name is definitely out there. So again, if they move Murray, then I think that you're right. It's just completely rebuild, and it makes no sense to me to try to get John Collins. But if they don't move Murray, then it makes a lot of sense to try to pursue John Collins via trade or try to sign someone like DeAndre Ayton. So I think that, like I said, going into Thursday, I have no idea what this team is doing with these reports that they might move Murray or they may not, because then it could be totally different avenues that they drive into going forward. So,
and there's kind of a deadline tomorrow, right? Like the Gallinari deadline, I think, presents a good inflection point. Obviously, if John Collins is what's part of the deal, then this can go on past that. But if it really is a Gallinari construction, which I like so much more because I think that the Spurs could get draft capital back for that, and then they waive him, they have one less player on their roster and more cap space to take on dead money for draft assets. Like if that's how they're pivoting into this rebuild, that's the best way to do it. And if that's the way they go, they have until end of day tomorrow. So there is a little bit of a time limit, and that's part of why I would expect it to be so quiet, because a lot of the times when these deals are getting worked out, the day before it happens is usually the quietest day. Like if you notice around trade deadline day, and there's a lot of reporting the weekend before, and then the couple of days before it's completely quiet, and then all of a sudden, boom, everything starts coming in. So that could be happening here, or maybe they're just the talk stalled and they're dead.
Yeah, and like I said, the big thing to watch with Gallo, again, his deal is guaranteed for $5 million as long as he's not. If he's waived by tomorrow, then yes, he only gets paid $5 million. But if he doesn't get waived by tomorrow, then he gets the full $21 million. And what they're discussing right now is Atlanta and him is basically probably pushing his guarantee date back, like the Memphis Grizzlies just did with Danny Green. But that's going to increase that $5 million guaranteed to maybe a later date, maybe bump it to like 10, 15 million. Who knows how much that they're talking about. But that's something to watch. Like you said, if they end up delaying that guaranteed it, then I think that there's a good chance he's going to end up getting traded, and probably, most likely San Antonio, because that's the team that's reportedly interested in him only to get that draft capital, those assets, and that would probably include DeJounte Murray. So again, that's something to watch. I think you brought up a great point there to watch what happens to Gallinari on Wednesday, whether he gets he gets paid in full the $21 million, or if they guaranteed it, they push his guarantee back, or if they just waive him. I think if they just waive him and they only pay him $5 million, then that tells me that the Murray trade may not happen. There's a stronger indication it may not happen. All right, so now let's talk about the last move that the Spurs can do, and this is one that I can tell you already fans are going to want to happen because this is the least exciting move, but it's the best move for their future if they're really rebuilding, and that is to use your cap space to take bad contracts for future picks. So. This is something that the Spurs kind of did last year a little bit. I know they signed like Doug McDermott. They got a few free agents, but they pretty much did this with a lot of their cap space. They took on, we know that DeRozan had a sign and trade to go to Chicago. And what the Spurs did there was they took on the contracts of Al-Farouq Amino, who they later on waived. And then they also took on Thad Young, who they ended up flipping for a first-round pick to Toronto later on in the year. And they ended up getting some picks out of this. They got a future first last year from Chicago, and then they also got 2 future seconds. So again, this is not the exciting way. You may see that if the Spurs end up, getting some player, a veteran player, who's probably not going to be here long term, then but they get picks out of it. This is what they decided to do with their cap space. We know that the Knicks are a team to watch here because they have just had multiple players that they want to move just to try to get to that amount that they can open for in cap space, so they can open Jalen Brunson from the Mavs. I know that Evan Fournier has been a name out there. He's making $18 million. Alex Burks is a name who's out there making $10 million, and then Nerlens Noel as well. Is a free agent that I think they were discussing with the Clippers of flipping him. So again, if we see the Spurs acquire a player who's a veteran player, maybe in the last year or two of his deal, but they get picks for it, well, then this is what they decided to do. They decided to go with the getting the draft assets now and using your cap space for that. Because again, this free agent class is, it's just not one of the best free agent classes out there to be a cap space team. What are your thoughts on this route, Kyle?
So this is actually maybe the most exciting route to me, but that's because I'm a little bit of a weirdo, I guess. Like, to me, and also part of it is just like, I know we've talked recently, like whenever I come on the podcast and we talk about the draft or we talk about free agency or we talk about whatever, for me, a lot of it is just kind of looking at this team and saying, like, what are they doing? Like, are they content with making the 9th seed? Like, oh man, maybe one year if they get lucky, it's the 6th seed. Like, or do they actually want to get back into championship contention, which, they've been quoted as recently saying, like, our goal all along has been championship contention. And if that's the case, like, this is one of those things you have to go through. And, you mentioned New York. That was one team that I had kind of had circled. The other one is Philly, who is supposedly going to get PJ Tucker, but they don't have the money to get him right now. The Spurs could work into that and kind of be a team that gets draft capital there. And I don't know if it needs to be a long bottom out rebuild like it was for the Thunder, but I do think that 1 or 2 years of kind of taking your medicine, especially in this, like, if they get Victor Wembanyama in this draft, like, the rebuild is over already. You have your cornerstone, you have your centerpiece. And like, I know even if they have the worst record in the league, the chances that happens still aren't perfect. It's like a 17% chance. So like, but it's one of those things where this is the year, kind of like when they got Tim Duncan. If there was any year, this is the year where you're actually getting that type of player who can like turn you around within 1 year. And I think there's a couple other really good players in this draft too, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that it makes a lot of sense for them to go about it this way. Even if they're not completely tanking, we looked over the free agents, like Isaiah Hardenstein was the most exciting one to me. And like, if they have, this 20+ million in cap space, I mean, they can sign him with like less than half of that. They can still be a dumping ground for Evan Fournier in draft picks. Like they can still be competitive and still use their space, because I'm not seeing what they could use it better for, to be like a cap space, like a team where other teams can send their bad contracts into space. I think even if they make 1 or 2 signings and they're trying to stay competitive, I still think that's what they should do with the remainder of their cap space.
Yeah, I agree. And again, like, definitely if they trade Murray, I think that's definitely where they're headed, to that route. But again, Spurscast, this is if Thursday happens and you don't see the Spurs getting involved in like DeAndre Ayton rumors or any some of the top level free agents, well then we know that their most likely direction is probably headed toward that, just getting some bad contracts. So they make a trade, and it's for like someone like Alec Burks. Why? It was mainly to get those future assets. So again, and that'll just indicate that they're continuing with this rebuild process, and they really want to go for that direction. So again, we'll kind of see what happens on Thursday. Again, the big thing to watch right now is Wednesday. Do the Spurs offer Lonnie Walker a qualifying offer to make him restricted free agent, or does he go into free agency on Thursday as an unrestricted free agent? Also, like we talked about regarding the DeJounte, John Collins, Danilo Gallinari trade rumors, keep an eye on Gallinari if his guarantee completely guarantees his $21 million, or if the Hawks waive him, or if they extend his guarantee option. And so now, Colin, so we owe one of our old Project Spurs friends and one of our old staff members who writes now with the Era Alamo, Josh Paredes. We owe him a quick because I know that I've been wanting to get you on for a few weeks, but then a lot of stuff just happened. The draft came, and it was just hard for us to kind of align our schedules. It's mainly my fault. But Josh, this is back from May 24th. Josh had a question, and I wanted you to be the guest for this question. question, but so it's an old question that we probably know our answer by now, but even though it's not really as applicable today, but just to go through it, because I wanted to answer for Josh. He had asked back on May 24th. He said, if you're doing more Q&A on the next Spurscast, I'd love to hear your take on maxing Ayton versus maxing LaVine versus maxing neither. And so, again, I think we both said that we doubt LaVine's coming at this point, but who would you? Let's just say, let's just say everything was going bad with Chicago and LaVine at this point. He was going to go into free agency. And let's just say the Spurs did have enough for max for both players. Now they don't regarding LaVine. Who would you have wanted in that situation, or would you have wanted neither?
Oh, I definitely would have maxed LaVine with like no second thought. Like 3-level scorer with some size is what wins you games in the NBA today. Like the defense, we can figure it out with other players. That's what I would be thinking if I was in the Spurs front office. I know that if they get Ayton, they might have to max him. I'm like, that would help the team. I'm less excited about that, but definitely, like, if LaVine was an option and I were the Spurs general manager, I would be throwing all of the money I could at that situation.
Okay, I'm with you as well, man. Because I wrote up a profile of LaVine before I knew he was going back to Chicago, and man, just looking at some of his shooting stats that like no other Spurs player even has close to, it's just like, wow. Like you said, 3-level scorer. Here it is. Here I found it real quick. 61% of his threes were pull-up threes. Imagine just seeing him just pick off Jakob pick and rolls and then just taking threes. And he actually made them right at the mark that would be efficient. So again, I would have said let LaVine as well. And it's just, for me, it would have been like, what can you do with just more talent? Like LaVine's already an all-star. You pairing him with a current all-star in DeJounte. Ayton might be an all-star down the road, but he's not yet. We don't know for sure if he has that level of playing him. Whereas LaVine, we definitely know it. And so that's what I would have just been really interested to see how him and DeJounte would have ran the backcourt together. But like we both agree, we just don't think at this point anymore that LaVine's going to end up leaving Chicago. So yeah, so Josh, if you listen to this episode, we finally apologize that it took forever. It took multiple weeks, but we finally got to that. Almost, oh my gosh, it took a month actually for us to answer that question, but we finally got to that question there, and I did want to answer it in real time whenever we discussed it. So don't forget to visit Project Spurs. Spurscast listeners, we are making sure to write up all the offseason news. The Spurs just released their summer league roster, so that's the latest piece that's up on the site. Any kind of rumors and stuff, we'll make sure to discuss here on Spurscast. We also have our Project Spurs Twitter handle. They do those the Twitter Spaces thing, so make sure you check that out as well. Thanks to Collin for joining me here on the Spurscast episode, and also to Joe Garcia for mixing and producing the episode. From all of us at Project Spurs, stay safe and have a great day.